So I had so much fun doing the live show last week that I decided, why not do it again this week? I know I mentioned that I would only be doing live shows monthly, but I was thinking about it, and I'll get more into it in just a second, but I think doing more consistent live shows will be more beneficial long term. So that being said, welcome into the Derek Diamond Experience podcast. I am your host, Derek Diamond. As I mentioned at the top of the show, I'll be interviewing filmmaker Nathan Pfaff about his really cool documentary, Film School Africa. But before we do that, for the special live segment, I wanted to talk about the challenges of podcasting and what keeps me doing it. So, for those who may not know, I originally started this podcast back in 2014. It's crazy to think we're actually coming up on the 6-year anniversary of it. I did it as a way to challenge myself. Growing up, especially through high school and through early college, I dealt with almost crippling social anxiety. I remember outside of my inner circle of friends just being really, really afraid to talk to anyone. And I specifically remember in college, I was taking a public speaking class because it was a requirement. And we had to do an impromptu icebreaker speech. Well, that just put this paralyzing fear in me, and I remember almost breaking down and crying during the whole speech because I didn't know what to say. I had everyone, and it wasn't a very big class. It was only, I'd say 15 people, maybe 20. So that was a big wake-up call for me. And then years later, when I started doing the Nerd Cave podcast, that was just essentially me talking with friends. But I knew that I wanted to do something a little bit different, and that was kind of the inspiration of starting this show. I've always been fascinated by hearing other people's stories, where they came from, why they chose the career path they did. That's almost more fascinating to me than the person's career itself. So that, and I was thinking, and Adam Norrie is joining us on the live stream. How you doing, Norrie? I started the podcast as a way to, one, meet new people, and secondly, it would force me to get out of my comfort zone. It would force me to meet new people and chat with new people. And I would say it's definitely helped out quite a bit. And as the show's gone along and evolved throughout the years, it started as a variety show. I incorporated a little bit more of the live streaming into it, mostly because I needed content. But I needed a new challenge. And that was when I made the decision to change the format to strictly filmmaking. And it was also to help out my aspiring career. But about a month ago, I started feeling that little bit of complacency with the show again. And almost out of a necessity, I thought, well, why don't I try doing the live show thing again? And doing the top 10 movies was a really good way to reintroduce it. And I had a lot of fun doing it. I had quite a few people join in the conversation. We had a lot of fun. I had fun playing the sound bites, listing all my movies, and hearing everybody else's thoughts and movies they enjoyed throughout the year. And I really love the engagement of doing live shows. So I think, I'm going to do it a little bit more than monthly. Obviously, I'm not going to do it every single week because it's just a physical and logistic impossibility to do. There are going to be weeks that I just simply do not have the time to do a live show. But I am going to do them when I can because I like the challenge of not just doing a live show, but doing it by myself. Doing the Q&A is a lot different because you do still have that interaction with people. But doing a review like I'm going to do tonight, really, it presents a new challenge for me, and I think it's going to be something that I do on a more consistent basis. I can't tell you that there's going to be a weekly live show. I can't tell you that I'm going to do it monthly or that there's even going to be a consistent schedule with it. I just don't have that information. Just my schedule gets so wacky sometimes. But when I can, I'm going to do a live show, whether it's doing a review or I'm toying around with the idea because I want to do an Oscars preview show. and I'm toying around with the idea of doing that live. I don't know how I'm going to shoot it. I don't know what setup I'm going to use. Obviously, I'm going to have the same backdrop with the brick and everything, but I'll figure something out. And that's likely going to be the review portion of next week's show. And also coming up, I want to try and feature as much content for Pensacon as I can. So Pensacon's at the end of February leading into March. So starting in February, I'm going to have either someone from Pensacon on to do the review segment with me, or I'm going to have an interview with a Pensacon guest, whether it's a celebrity, maybe someone who worked in special effects, maybe some of the filmmakers who will be featured in the film festival. We'll have to see what happens. You know, the show is very much kind of going with the flow these days. You know, I do like to plan the show out at least a week in advance so I know what to tell the listeners, what they can expect for, you know, the upcoming week and so on and so forth. If I can do it even farther in advance, great. But I will say one thing that's going to come up in mid-February is I'm going to do a roundtable on the Power Rangers series. It was one of my favorite series growing up, and I actually am going to attach an interview to that I did with Catherine Sutherland, who was the second Pink Power Ranger, and she's also going to be appearing at Pensacon. And, you know, I'll have a lot of content from Pensacon that will feature on the show in March. So it's funny saying the show's kind of going with the flow, yet I do actually have things planned in advance. So anyway, that's kind of what's down the pipeline for the podcast, but I've kind of rambled long enough, so I think we'll get into our review for this evening, and that is the long-anticipated inaugural episode of Star Trek Picard, which is available on CBS All Access. And to preface that, everybody knows me as a big Star Wars fan, but I've never been a giant Star Trek fan. I don't hate Star Trek by any stretch, but I just could never quite get into it for the most part like Star Wars. You know, I love the episodic format that Star Trek has had since the 60s. Funny enough, I've actually never watched a single episode of the original series, and some of my friends might, you know, retract my nerd card for that, but it's just something that I never watched. But growing up, I stayed with my grandparents a lot during the summer when my mom would be at work, or I should say both my parents would be at work, and I watched a lot of TV, and one of the shows that I remember watching vividly was Star Trek: The Next Generation, and that was when I was introduced to the great Patrick Stewart, who is one of the best actors on the planet right now, and since then, you know, he went to star in X-Men, among many other wonderful projects. He's one of those actors that you're drawn to him when he's on screen because his performance just sucks you in through the theater screen or your television, wherever you're watching him. He just draws you in. He has that kind of magnetic charm that you want to be around at all times. So him, along with Data the android and other cool characters, I was just drawn right in. And then I remember as I got older and started doing, you know, other things outside of hanging out at my grandparents' house, I kind of fell off of Star Trek. I still stuck with Star Wars, and Luke Thompson has joined. Thank you for watching, Luke. So I was reintroduced to The Next Generation through the DVD sets because my grandma bought all 7 seasons on DVD. So I would borrow them, and I started watching them again and falling in love with it. And I that love never really carried through to the other Star Trek series. I did watch the movies. I've seen all the movies with the original cast, with all of the Next Generation crew. You know, it's a great franchise. Granted, I'm not a huge fan of it, as I've said, like other people are. There are some that Star Trek, that's their baby, much like Star Wars is for me and for, you know, other people that I know. But I do very much respect the franchise for its longevity. And when they announced that Picard was being made, that was what drew me back in because of that character. Because there seems to be this new trend of bringing back characters from the 80s and 90s and bringing them into, almost a next generation, no pun intended, of viewer. And I was curious as to what they were going to do with it, because I felt like Patrick Stewart would be one that he wouldn't. Luke, what's the difference between Star Wars and Star Trek? Star Wars is better. I'm kidding, of course. In my opinion, it's better, but Star Wars essentially both take place in space, but they have different characters. Star Wars is more known for the movies. Star Trek more known for the TV series. Well, Star Trek essentially is about Starfleet, which is like a 23rd, 24th century military, and it's about the Enterprise, which is a ship that goes out to seek new life and new civilizations, as said in the intro theme song. And then Star Wars is about the Jedi, the Sith, completely different takes on the whole space saga. But kind of going back to Picard a bit, I knew that Patrick Stewart knew what he was doing, in the sense that he wasn't just going to come back all these years later to play an old character because he was bored. I knew he would be a smart enough actor who would want to come back if it was good. And what I liked about this first episode, and yes, there will be spoilers, so, if you haven't watched the first episode, I don't know why you haven't. If you're a Star Trek fan, go. John Jekyll's joining, fan of Nerd Cave Retro. What's going on, John? Thank you so much for tuning in. So, what was I saying? So anyway, if you haven't watched Star Trek Picard and you're a Star Trek fan, you're doing yourself a disservice. So consider this your spoiler warning. Here we go. So the way the episode began was perfect to me. You see the old Enterprise D from the Next Generation TV show, which features Picard and Data playing poker. As Data played poker, not regularly, but enough to know that it was a thing during the show. And it was always a big deal that in the very last episode, Captain Picard finally joined in on the poker game, because he would come in and watch, but he would never actually sit down and participate. So seeing those two together, and if you've seen the movies and you know that Data died at the end of Star Trek Nemesis, you knew that something wasn't right. It had to either be a flashback or a dream sequence. And I love the dynamic between those two. Picard and Data were the TNG version of Kirk and Spock. So they're playing poker, and there was this funny moment where Data's pupil enlarges, and Picard mentions, you have a tell. And Data's like, what do you mean I have a tell? That's impossible. I'm an android. And he said, no, your pupil essentially dilates, but you're doing it to make me think that you have a tell. So when you're not doing it, that's when I know you're bluffing. So they continue the game. I just thought it was a really funny dynamic, and it showed the chemistry they had from the old TNG show. And then you notice things start to get a little weird. Picard goes all in on his bet. Data lays his cards down, and there's 5 queens. If you've played cards, you know that's an impossible hand. And you see Mars out the window of the Enterprise, and then it's destroyed. There's this huge flash. Data's gone, and then Picard wakes up in his bed. And he's living at his brother's old vineyard, Chateau Picard, with his dog, who's, funny enough, named Number 1, which he used to call his first officer, Commander Riker, on the Enterprise. So already we've seen some cool little nods to TNG, which I love. I think fan service, if done correctly, is fantastic. So we're seeing essentially what Picard's been doing as we... John Jekyll, you guys usually record Nerd Cave Retro on Wednesday nights. Now, so Jason's not able to record on Tuesdays anymore, so we moved the show to Wednesday nights at 7:30, and there is your plug for Nerd Cave Retro, which stars myself and Jason Robbins. You can check that out on Twitch at twitch.tv/jfunktastic every Wednesday night at 7:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. So we're seeing what Picard has been up to since we last saw him. We see that he's taken over his brother's vineyard, and things seem to be going well. But he mentions to his housekeeper that the dreams he's been having are what he loves, and it's the waking up that he's resenting. So you can tell he's clearly not very pleased with his current life. And we find out that he's no longer with Starfleet. He resigned. And we find out from an interview that he does, essentially with like a, almost like an evening news piece or a Barbara Walters interview. He's interviewed by this reporter that supposedly is about this supernova. And if you've watched the 2009 Star Trek film, you know about this supernova that created the Kelvin timeline. And that's where we got the villain from Star Trek 2009, Nero, who was a Romulan. So essentially what happened was the Romulan sun went supernova and destroyed the planet of Romulus. Well, they're enemies with Starfleet, but Picard looks at Romulan lives as just simply lives. So he's responsible for moving the Romulans from the planet to Mars. Well, what happens when they move them to Mars, this group of synthetics or androids, they're called synthetics now in Picard, go rogue and kill thousands of people and just wreck a lot of stuff on Mars. So after that, all synthetics are banned, and Picard is not very pleased with Starfleet because we find out that Starfleet withdrew from trying to save people from what happened. And as we all know, Captain Picard is a great humanitarian. Donna Kirby's joined. How you doing, Donna? Thank you for watching. So due to that, he resigns from Starfleet. Now, to backtrack a little bit, he had agreed to do this interview but not talk about why he left Starfleet. So, of course, the reporter pushes him to talk about it. So he gets upset, storms off. And then we meet the character of Daj, who is this young female character who we find out is accepted into the Daystrom Institute, which is this, huge cybernetic dealing with androids, synthetic life, everything that's located in Japan. Well, what happens is these assassins show up, kill her boyfriend, try to kill her, but it's almost like this wake-up call happens, and she attacks them and kills them. And this whole thing was just really, really cool. I thought the fight scene, though it was really quick, was really well choreographed. And I will say the look of this show has been great. It's very bright, colorful, and just the way it's shot with the camera movements and everything is just it's incredible. It's crazy to think that television, you could always tell back in the day that television had a little bit less quality than film, but now that's not the case. You watch a good weekly TV show and it looks better than some of the movies you see in theaters. It's crazy. But I think my favorite part of this entire show was when Picard went to the Starfleet archive because he had met Daj, because Daj escaped the assassins and went to Picard for help because she was seeing him in visions. And she also saw him, the interview of him being broadcast. So she goes to his home seeking guidance, and he knows that she looks familiar. So he goes into the Starfleet archive and finds this painting that Data had painted, obviously years before he died. And the girl in the painting looks exactly like Daj. And the painting is titled Daughter. So then we find out that Daj is actually a fully synthetic human being created from flesh and blood using one of Data's positronic neurons. So essentially she is Data's daughter, which completely floored me because we're seeing that even in death, Data is still having a really big influence on Star Trek and specifically in Jean-Luc Picard's life. And it was cool in Picard's room of the Starfleet archive because you see a lot of cool little pieces of memorabilia from Next Generation. You see a replica of the Enterprise E. You see the Klingon Batleth, which is their kind of version of a sword. It doesn't look like a sword, but it's used in the same way. But the one thing that stood out to me was this banner that the kids on the Enterprise D had made for Picard. And I can't tell you what episode it was from, but it said Captain Picard Day. And that just kind of took me back to just fond memories, because I remember that banner from watching an episode when I was younger, and that one really stood out to me. So, like I said earlier, it had enough of the fan service where it didn't feel like it was too on the nose. And this is when he finds the painting that Data made for him, and the title daughter, and the fact that it looks like Daj. So that's when he has the revelation that surely she had to have been created from Data, which we'll get into later is quite literally the case. She was made from one of Data's positronic neurons. So in theory, part of Data's essence lives in her. Well, as this stuff is being explained, another group of assassins show up, and they successfully kill Daj. So Picard, after he recovers, goes to the Daystrom Institute and finds out that B4, who is a prototype of Data, who's not as advanced, and Star Trek Nemesis is when they discovered him, Data uploaded a backup of his memories and his programming into B4. Well, B4 couldn't handle it, and all of it was pretty much lost. So they're really, they're really hitting home the fact that Data is gone. Which I had read that was one of the conditions that Brent Spiner had of returning to play Data, is that they not undo what happened in Nemesis. So this is when Picard finds out about the whole positronic neuron thing. And through that, he finds out that they were created, or Daj was created with a twin sister, whose name is, if I got this right, Dr. Soji Asher, who is working with the Romulans. So then we cut to the end when we find out that the Romulans have in fact taken over a battle-damaged Borg cube. And when the camera zoomed out and showed the wide shot of the cube, I said, holy crap. And then, of course, that's where the episode ended. So it was really John Jekyll. Sadly, I've only watched a little bit of The Next Generation. You should. It's a really good show, and it really hits home the fact of having a good ensemble cast with great chemistry, because there are episodes that focus more on, Picard. There's more that focus on Data, Geordi, Riker, Troy, Dr. Crusher. They all work together extremely well. You can tell it's a little bit dated in a bit, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. But it's a really good show. And like I said earlier, I'm not a huge Star Trek fan. I tried watching Deep Space Nine, not mine. I haven't tried watching Voyager, but like I said, I don't have that much experience with Star Trek. But I love The Next Generation. I specifically love the Picard character, and that was why I was stoked when this was announced. And really going into it, I didn't know that much about it. I knew that from the previews that Data was going to somehow make an appearance, and I assumed that it was going to be either a holodeck program or it was going to be in Picard's mind, whether it be a dream or maybe he's starting to lose it a little bit and he's starting to see Data. There is a scene that takes place in the vineyard with Picard and Data when Data's doing the original painting, when they're actually wearing their uniforms from the TNG show. That was a nice little throwback. But overall, I really loved this first episode. Patrick Stewart really drives it, as he should, because he's the title character. But his charm has not skipped a beat since TNG or anything else that he's been involved with. He just has, I said earlier, he has that very magnetic type of personality that just draws you in and you want to watch and you care about what his character is doing, no matter how meaningful his character actually is in whatever he's appearing in. When he's on screen, you pay attention. And I felt that and I watched this episode twice. I was drawn into every single scene with Picard. And he's in, for the most part, every scene in this entire show. But I'm very curious as to where they go with it, because they set it up as Picard spent the last 15, 20 years, however long it's been since he resigned from Starfleet, essentially being a bitter old man that's writing books that no one's going to read, and he's just laying around waiting to die. Well, now he has something to fight for. Daj unfortunately was killed, but there is still her twin sister, who you assume will have the same powers, because in the second fight with the assassins, for one, we discover that the assassins were Romulan. And second of all, she pretty easily beats them. It just took almost like a freak accident for her to get killed. But I'm assuming that that Dr. Asher is going to have these same abilities once they're, in a way, activated, when they have this, wake-up call or whatever. So I would very much recommend Star Trek Picard. The next episode comes out Thursday morning, and for those listening on the download, go back and check out episode 1. For those listening live, if you're curious about Star Trek, definitely go check it out, because it's just a very well done premiere episode. This is how you kick off a show, and I don't know how many episodes are going to be in this, but this was a heck of a way to kick it off, and I can't wait to watch more. I will be doing a review of the entire series once it's done. That's when I'll bring multiple people on, and we'll do kind of a series review and retrospective and get everyone else's thoughts. But I just wanted to come on here for a bit and actually kind of dissect the episode and little things that I noticed. There were really cool Easter eggs, like I said, with the Starfleet archive, and the beginning with showing Picard and Data is a nice callback to TNG. And there were references to Bruce Maddox, who actually built Daj and Dr. Asher, because that's a callback to one of the Next Generation episodes when he wanted to dissect Data, and it led to a trial of deciding whether or not Data, who is an android, is a sentient being that can make his own decisions. So they did a nice job of not retconning anything. I love the reference to the Romulan supernova. I love the reference to Bruce Maddox. I loved all the callbacks to previous generations or iterations of Star Trek, because it shows that it all mattered. But it's also served as a relaunching platform of previously known characters. So I'm excited to see where it goes. I know I'll definitely be waking up early Thursday morning to watch episode 2, and I'll be doing it every week because they've hooked me. I've got CBS All Access, and I'm at least going to have it until Picard is done. They've already announced season 2, and a really cool thing that happened was Patrick Stewart went on The View, and he invited Whoopi Goldberg to reappear as Guinan in season 2, and of course she said yes. But I just thought the way it was done was really cool. So I think that's going to wrap up my thoughts on Star Trek Picard. Like I said, I'll be coming back in a few weeks or whenever the show is done, and we'll do a full recap of it. But I did want to say in closing, I meant to mention this at the start of the show, but I'll say this as kind of the transition into, the closing out for the live show, and for those who are listening on the download, stick around for the interview segment. But something that happened, and this has garnered huge attention, of course, but NBA legend Kobe Bryant passed away in a really tragic helicopter crash on Sunday. And it's one of those things that I think you'll remember what happened or you'll remember where you were when you found out what happened to Kobe. It's like a lot of people can say, where were you when 9/11 happened? I remember where I was when that happened. After I had gotten a massage, I looked at my phone and I just saw a ton of notifications. Kobe Bryant dead, Kobe Bryant dead, Kobe Bryant dead. I had text messages, Kobe Bryant's dead, Kobe Bryant's dead. My initial thought was, okay, well, what happened? What happened to Kobe Bryant? And unfortunately, what happened was Kobe Bryant, along with his daughter and several other people, were killed in a helicopter crash. And there's just been so much outpouring on social media and on ESPN, all types of sports and news outlets, because he was much more than just a basketball player. He was a inspiration, and he was a once in a generation type of athlete. And I just think his drive is very inspiring, and it was very inspiring to people because he never settled for being anything less than the best. And he'll go down as one of the greatest NBA players of all time. But I bring this up because it really made me think of something, because I've kind of been going through a little bit of a life change as far as my outlook on things, and trying not to be as worried about things that may or may not be in my control. But the biggest thing that I took away from that is, wherever you are, it doesn't matter how big or small the issues you might have, or whatever the case may be. Always take the time to tell those that you care about how much you care, because you never know when you won't get the chance to do it again. And I know that's kind of a somber note to end this portion of the podcast on, but like I said, I wanted to mention it at the beginning, but I did not. But thank you guys so much for taking the time to sit through this Star Trek Picard review. I'll be doing, like I said earlier, I'm hoping to do an Oscars preview show next week. I'll let everyone know what the status of that is. It'll either be live or pre-recorded. I'll have to check my hopeful guest availability on that. And then there will be an interview segment attached as well. So for those listening on, or for those watching live, thank you guys so much for joining me. Hopefully we get to do this on a more regular basis. And for those who are listening on the download, stay tuned for my fun interview with filmmaker Nathan Pfaff. He actually created this really cool documentary called Film School Africa about a friend of his who teaches film classes in Africa. And the footage I've just seen the trailer and a clip or two, but it's really inspiring stuff. And his story in itself is very unique, and it's really inspiring. As someone who wants to make films as a career, this story shows that you can do it. You can definitely do it, because he has done it and everything. So thank you guys so much for watching. As I said, for those listening on the download, stay tuned for the interview. And for those watching live, we'll see you guys next time.